Warfare in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia from around 3500 BC to 1200 BC provides us with some of the earliest examples of organized conflict in human history. Conflicts that shaped the identity of emerging civilizations. Across the fertile floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and along the life-giving banks of the Nile, people developed powerful city-states and kingdoms. They forged innovations in politics, religion, technology, and, inevitably, warfare. The competition for resources, control of trade routes, and the desire to assert political domination prompted societies to craft new ways of waging war. Over millennia, ancient armies in Mesopotamia and Egypt shifted from small bands of tribal warriors to well-organized forces capable of building empires. The Mesopotamian region, encompassing parts of modern-day Iraq, Syria, and beyond, saw the rise of the Sumerians, who are among the earliest known urban settlers, developing organized city-states by approximately 3500 BC. Each city-state, such as Ur, Uruk, Kish, and Lagash, established distinct political and religious structures. Many of them centered around local deities and temple complexes called ziggurats. Competition between these cities was fierce, and because the region offered few natural defenses, warfare became a practical necessity for survival. Regular conflict over water rights, trade routes, and farmland demanded not only militaristic readiness, but also the development of fortification systems and specialized soldiers. One of the earliest recorded wars took place between the city-states of Umma and Lagash. Stone steles depicting victory parades and images of armies show us that by 2500 BC, Sumerians were already organized under kings or military leaders who commanded disciplined contingents of infantry armed with spears, axes, and bows. The Sumerian phalanx, a dense formation of spearmen, illustrated how formations and discipline could triumph over less organized bands. Yet Sumerian warfare also carried strong religious undertones. Kings and generals fought in the name of their patron gods, seeking divine approval for expansion or defense. Simultaneously, Egyptians developed their own distinct culture along the Nile. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under legendary kings such as Narmer, sometimes referred to as Menes, around 3100 BC, marked the birth of a centralized state. Although the earliest evidence of warfare in Egypt might revolve around smaller-scale conflicts to unify the realm, the Egyptians soon recognized the need for professional soldiers. Commanded by regional nobility or overseen by the pharaoh himself, these early troops employed copper or bronze weapons, spears, clubs, and later axes with metal heads. Yet for centuries, Egypt was relatively insulated from major outside invasions, thanks to its deserts and predictable agricultural cycle. Warfare in the Old Kingdom, c. 2080 to 2080 BC, was primarily localized and aimed at subjugating regional peoples along the Nile or in nearby Sinai. Massive pyramids overshadowed the history of the era, yet behind their construction lay a society capable of mobilizing manpower not just for building projects, but for defense as well. As we move deeper into the Bronze Age, Mesopotamia witnessed the emergence of larger territorial states, starting with the Akkadian Empire under Sargon of Akkad, c. 300 BC. Sargon's conquests drew upon advanced organization, a standing army that included specialized units. Under him, the use of the composite bow, a more powerful design blending wood, sinew, and horn, became a lethal advantage in battle. Akkadian soldiers had standard-issued spears, and some utilized early bronze swords or daggers. They also built formidable city walls throughout their empire, blending offense and defense in an attempt to maintain unity among diverse regions. Sargon's legacy established the template for later Mesopotamian empires, a centralized figure controlling a complex bureaucracy, with warfare serving as a tool for uniting scattered city-states into a single polity. Concurrently, in Egypt, the Old Kingdom faltered due to internal strife and economic pressures, leading to what historians call the First Intermediate Period, c. 2180–2060 BC. During this era, local warlords and nomarchs, regional governors, vied for power. Soldiers still fought with straightforward spears, maces, and bows, but the scale of conflict was more local. Only with the resurgence of central authority under the Middle Kingdom, c. 2040–1780 BC, did Egypt reassert itself. Pharaohs like Mentuhotep II reunified the land and expanded trade routes into Nubia. Middle Kingdom armies grew more organized, with better logistics and an emerging administrative class to supply and pay troops. Yet for all their growing sophistication, the Egyptians at this point still lacked the advanced chariot warfare that would later define them. Back in Mesopotamia, after Akkad's decline, the region fractured into competing kingdoms, allowing for the rise of Urdvi, the third dynasty of Ur, around 2100 BC. This Neo-Sumerian empire brought renewed stability, but also continued the tradition of frequent military campaigns to hold vassal states in check. Walls and fortresses were integral to Sumerian strategic thinking. Controlling access to farmland and water channels was equally critical, as agriculture underpinned these societies. The decline of the Ur-3 state around 2000 BC set the stage for new powers, particularly the Amorites, who established numerous city-states, the most famous of which was Babylon under Hammurabi, c. 1792 to 1750 BC. Hammurabi's code reveals the administrative sophistication behind Mesopotamian armies. It details sanctions for army desertion and outlines obligations of vassal states. Even so, warfare remained brutal and personal. Conquering forces sacked cities, captured elites, and at times deported populations. Around the same time, the Hyksos made their appearance in Egypt, ushering in the Second Intermediate Period, c. 1650–1550 BC. The Hyksos were a group of mixed Semitic and possibly Levantine origins who seized control of the Nile Delta. Their success hinged on technological advantages such as the composite bow, more advanced metal weaponry, and crucially, the horse-drawn chariot. The arrival of the chariot and horse in Egypt revolutionized the way Egyptians fought. Before the Hyksos incursion, Egyptians did not rely heavily on chariot warfare, if at all. Suddenly, the Theban princes in Upper Egypt faced the challenge of adapting new technologies to expel these foreign rulers. Over decades, the Thebans gradually adopted and refined chariot technology, forging alliances and mastering new forms of combat. By the time Ahmose first launched the final wars against the Hyksos, Egyptians had integrated the horse and chariot, plus improved bows, into an effective combined arms approach. Chariot warfare in the ancient Near East, and especially in Egypt, came to symbolize a new era of conflict. A chariot equipped with a driver and an archer offered mobility, speed, and devastating ranged attacks, especially against slower-moving infantry. Maintaining chariots required skilled chariot builders, specialized horse breeders, and adequate fodder and stabling. Thus, a large chariot corps signaled a wealthy, organized state. In Mesopotamia, The Kassites, Hittites, and Mitanni similarly embraced chariot warfare during the mid-2nd millennium BC. Their rivalry shaped who dominated trade routes. The Hittites, controlling much of Anatolia, used chariots effectively against both Mesopotamian states and Egyptian armies in later centuries. As Egypt emerged from the Hyksos yoke, the new kingdom, situated from 550–1070 BC, soared to new martial heights. Pharaohs like Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, and Ramses II led armies beyond the Sinai into Canaan and Syria, clashing with local city-states and other great powers of the region, including the Mitanni and Hittites. Thutmose III's campaigns reveal a sophisticated use of chariots, archers, and disciplined infantry. At the Battle of Megiddo, c. 1457 BC, Thutmose III executed a daring forced march through narrow passes to surprise the Canaanite coalition. The resulting victory ushered in decades of Egyptian dominance over the Levant. Egyptian depictions from temple reliefs at Karnak or Thebes celebrate the pharaoh's prowess, showing captive chieftains and tribute from foreign lands. Meanwhile, Mesopotamia saw shifting powers. After the Old Babylonian period, the region fell into centuries of fragmentation. The Kassites ruled Babylon for centuries, forging a stable, if less expansionist, realm. The Middle Assyrian kingdom also began to expand under kings like Ashur-uballit I, 1160 BC, and Tiglath-Pileser I, 1110 BC, forging what might be considered the precursor to the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians recognized the value of rigorous military discipline. They built roads to move armies faster and introduced advanced siege techniques, battering rams, sappers, and siege towers, allowing them to capture heavily fortified cities. This capacity for siege warfare was a key difference from earlier eras. As walls became bigger, armies had to innovate in order to breach them. Egypt's martial achievements in the New Kingdom soared under Amenhotep III and his son, Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten. Yet, Akhenaten's shift toward monotheistic worship of Aten might have distracted from foreign policy. When Tutankhamun and, later, Horemheb and Seti I strove to restore Egyptian prestige, they faced intensifying competition from the Hittite Empire for control of Syria. The Hittites excelled in chariot warfare, boasting heavier, three-man chariots that could charge through opposing lines. Their expansions led to one of the most famous battles of the Late Bronze Age, the Battle of Kadesh, c. 1245 BC, between the forces of Ramses II and the Hittite king Mu'tali II. Ramses II, commanding multiple Egyptian divisions, nearly suffered a catastrophic defeat after being tricked into believing the Hittite army was far away. Hittite chariots overran part of the Egyptian camp. Yet Egyptian accounts claim Ramses rallied valiantly, and thanks to the arrival of reinforcements, the Egyptians averted total disaster. While the battle ended inconclusively, it is one of the earliest engagements in recorded history for which we have detailed tactical reports, especially from Egyptian temple reliefs. Symbolically, it underscored how large Late Bronze Age armies could be. Tens of thousands of men, along with thousands of chariots, met in a single place for a pitched battle, an extraordinary demonstration of mobilization capability. Further east, the Mitanni, or Hanagalbat, controlled swaths of Upper Mesopotamia and Syria. They too embraced chariot warfare, breeding a special type of horse and developing advanced training manuals for charioteers. According to cuneiform evidence, the Mitanni practiced formal horse training regimes that systematically improved performance in battle. Yet, Mitanni found itself squeezed between the rising Hittites to the north and the growing power of Assyria to the east. The result was constant tension, and eventually, the Mitanni kingdom fractured, with parts of it falling under Hittite dominance and other parts under Assyrian or local control. The Elamites, to the southeast in what is now Iran, also participated in these swirling conflicts, raiding Mesopotamian states and occasionally seizing the spoils. They specialized in archery and had mountainous homelands that provided strategic advantage. Raids from the Zagros Mountains into lower Mesopotamia were frequent. Meanwhile, in the southernmost regions by the Persian Gulf, the Sealand dynasty at times posed local challenges to Babylon or Kassite rule. This environment of multi-sided rivalry drove innovation in the tools of war. More refined bronze casting, new arrow designs, different shield shapes, and an evolving role for cavalry, as people discovered that horseback riding, not just chariot riding, could be harnessed for battlefield advantage. Examining weaponry across Egypt and Mesopotamia in this period reveals a fascinating panorama of technology. Early on, arsenals relied heavily on flint or obsidian blades, supplemented by copper axes and spears. By 2500 BC, bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, became widespread, enabling sharper, more durable swords, daggers, and spearheads. In Mesopotamia, the tanged dagger or sword with a mid-rib design gained popularity. Egyptian craftsmen developed the khopesh, a sickle-shaped sword with a curved blade that combined slashing and hooking capabilities. The composite bow revolutionized ranged combat in both regions, offering much greater power and range than simple self-bows. Master bowmakers laid layers of horn, sinew, and wood, glued with resins, and then wrapped the structure in birch bark or leather to prevent moisture damage. Armor developed more slowly, since bronze or copper scales were expensive and time-consuming to produce. Wealthy elites might wear scale armor, thousands of small metal plates sewn onto a leather backing, while common soldiers made do with leather tunics or thick cloth padding. In Mesopotamia, conical bronze helmets gradually spread among high-ranking officers and charioteers. Egyptian depictions often show their soldiers wearing little body armor, relying instead on shields made of wood and hide. However, the pharaoh and his close retinue might wear special protective gear, including metal-studded aprons, scale corselets, or elaborate headdresses. Logistics underpinned these military achievements. Armies in Mesopotamia and Egypt required large surpluses of grain, fish, and other rations to keep soldiers and horses fed. Craftsmen had to supply spare chariot wheels and arrow shafts, while scribes tracked troop numbers and equipment distribution. The great powers often negotiated or fought over trade routes to ensure that they had the tin necessary to produce bronze. Diplomatic correspondences, like the Amarna letters from Egypt's 14th century BC, reveal that local rulers regularly requested shipments of archers or chariots from the pharaoh and complained about the threat from rival states. Warfare and diplomacy were deeply intertwined. Religion also shaped warfare. In Mesopotamia, each major city recognized a patron deity, and the outcome of battles was often seen as an expression of that deity's favor. Victorious kings boasted of capturing enemy gods' statues, an act that symbolized seizing the protective power behind their foes. Similarly, Egyptian pharaohs depicted themselves as chosen by the gods, especially Amun-Ra, their might validated by divine intervention. Temples served as propaganda centers, depicting scenes of the pharaoh smiting foreign enemies. The king-smiting scene, repeated across centuries of temple reliefs, vividly portrayed the subjugation of enemies under the unstoppable might of the crowned Egyptian monarch. One cannot ignore the interplay of geography. In Mesopotamia, the plains left cities vulnerable to invasion, forcing them to build thick walls and protective moats. The rivers, though life-giving, also served as avenues for troop movement. In times of conflict, controlling key fords or bridging points became a strategic priority. The harsh deserts to the west, the mountainous zones to the north and east, and the varied climate demanded flexible tactics. In contrast, Egypt's environment offered a natural fortress in the form of deserts and cataracts along the Nile. This partly explains why Egyptian dynasties, once stable, could last for centuries with minimal invasions. When foreign incursions did happen, like the Hyksos or the Sea Peoples, Egyptian armies had to adapt quickly or risk collapse. By the 13th century BC, conflict in the broader Near East reached a new zenith. The so-called Age of Empires pitted the Egyptians, Hittites, Assyrians, Babylonians, and smaller polities against each other in a complex diplomatic web. Alliances shifted. Royal families exchanged letters, gifts, and even marriages to cement relationships. Yet these alliances were always precarious, subject to betrayal or a sudden regime change. When diplomacy failed, war erupted. Siege warfare continued to advance, especially among the Assyrians, who systematically used siege ramps, sappers, and psychological tactics to force cities to surrender quickly. Trade caravans along the Levantine coast carried goods between Mesopotamia and the Nile, but also risked raids by bandits or rebellious local princes. Egyptian garrisons in places like Jaffa or Megiddo tried to keep the peace. Similarly, Mesopotamian armies, particularly under the rising Assyrian kings, advanced west to secure trade routes in Syria. The presence of well-fortified city-states demanded protracted campaigns, straining the resources of would-be conquerors. As armies grew larger, states needed more scribes, more advanced resource management, and complex supply lines. This intensification of warfare in the late Bronze Age fostered a sense of interconnectivity among the great powers, but also heightened tensions that would eventually lead to breakdowns. An essential aspect of ancient warfare was the spoils system. Victor states would seize gold, silver, livestock, and skilled artisans. Sometimes entire populations were displaced. Captives could be turned into laborers, fueling monumental architecture. In Egypt, foreign captives helped build temples or expand agricultural lands. In Mesopotamia, deportations served the dual purpose of punishing rebellious regions and using their workforce for the empire's own projects. This cyclical pattern of conquest, tribute, and forced labor shaped the economy. War was never just about battlefield glory. It was woven into the tapestry of state building. Approaching the cusp of 1200 BC, we encounter signs of widespread upheaval known to historians as the Late Bronze Age collapse. Whether triggered by migrations, climate change, the invasion of the Sea Peoples, or internal rebellions, the great powers faced crises. In Mesopotamia, the Kassite dynasty in Babylon began to falter. The Middle Assyrian kingdom endured internal strife, though it would eventually re-emerge as the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the 10th century BC. The Hittite Empire vanished from Anatolia, leaving behind scattered Neo-Hittite states. In Canaan, new groups, including the Philistines, established footholds. Egypt, battered by multiple invasions, retreated from its imperial holdings in the Levant, entering a slow decline after the reign of Ramses III. The ephemeral unity that once allowed these states to field large chariot armies and maintain vast networks of trade unraveled. We cannot underestimate the role warfare played in the late Bronze Age collapse. Overextension had made these empires vulnerable. The cost of perpetual campaigning and the reliance on tributary states proved unsustainable when key trade routes failed, or when new waves of migrating peoples introduced fresh layers of conflict. Warriors from the Aegean, or the Central Mediterranean, loosely grouped under the term Sea Peoples, attacked coastal cities, sacked major centers, and demanded resettlement. Although Egypt famously repelled them under Ramses III, the victory was costly, and internal fractures weakened the state. In Mesopotamia, the collapse manifested differently, but the region's tapestry of city-states was severely affected. The synergy that once fueled military expansions fractured into localized power struggles. Summarizing warfare in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia between 3500 BC and 200 BC reveals a story of evolving tactics, technologies, and statecraft. Early city-states in Sumer clashed for farmland and water rights, while the unification of Egypt shaped a powerful and centralized kingdom that used the Nile as a strategic artery. Chariot technology, introduced by outside influences, whether the Hyksos in Egypt or steppe peoples in Mesopotamia, dramatically changed the tempo of war, favoring speed and shock. Bronze became the backbone of advanced weaponry, with swords, daggers, spears, and arrowheads forged to lethal perfection. Composite bows extended the lethal range of armies, while thick city walls and elaborate siege techniques turned battles into extended campaigns requiring advanced logistics. Religious and ideological dimensions framed warfare, as kings presented themselves as chosen by the gods to expand territory or defend their people. Monuments and reliefs displayed victorious pharaohs smiting foreign captives, or Mesopotamian monarchs trampling foes under chariot wheels. The link between theology, politics, and war was intimate. Warfare was not merely a necessity for survival, but often a divine mandate. In victory, kings erected steles boasting of their achievements. In defeat, entire dynasties could crumble. Such complexities reach beyond the battlefield to shape how these civilizations rose or fell. The ability to sustain a standing army, feed it, and replace fallen warriors with new recruits demanded sophisticated administrative systems. The concept of a stable empire, where central authority set policy, collected tribute, and secured borders, coalesced through centuries of warfare experience in both Egypt and Mesopotamia. In each environment, a delicate equilibrium took root, one that might last for decades, but could be shattered by internal revolts, external invasions, or natural disasters. It's striking to note the similarities in how both regions eventually succumbed to large-scale disruptions around 1200 BC. While the immediate catalysts differed, sea peoples attacking Egyptian and Levantine coasts, or new tribal confederations pressing into Mesopotamia, the systemic vulnerabilities of each major kingdom became apparent. The shared reliance on bronze and long-distance tin trade, the cost of perpetually manning chariot armies, and the fractious nature of alliances contributed to the unraveling of the old order. Many states withdrew into smaller, more defensible enclaves, seeding the dream of controlling vast swaths of territory. But even after this period of upheaval, the lessons learned in warfare did not vanish. Egypt's legacy of chariot tactics and fortress building would influence subsequent Nubian and later rulers. Mesopotamia, for its part, would eventually see the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, c. 900 to 600 BC, which capitalized on the lessons of siege warfare and a standing army structure to dominate the region on an unprecedented scale. The seeds of these future powers were sown in the earlier Bronze Age crucible, proving that warfare evolution is continuous and builds upon the successes and failures of previous centuries. We also should recognize the profound cultural exchange that warfare sometimes facilitated. Egyptian contact with the Levant, for instance, brought new plants, animals, and technologies to the Nile. Mesopotamian conquests spread ideas about writing systems, mathematics, and religious syncretism. Soldiers marching with caravans often carried not only weapons but also goods and knowledge. Although war is typically destructive, in these ancient times it also functioned as a conduit for cross-cultural fertilization. And so, from small-scale skirmishes between Sumerian city-states to the pitched battles of chariot armies at Megiddo or Kadesh, the arc of warfare in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia from 3500 BC to 1200 BC is vast, dynamic, and deeply human. Entire civilizations rose on the backs of martial innovations and alliances, only to collapse under the weight of unforeseen crises or stronger opponents. In that sense, their history of warfare is also a cautionary tale about ambition and overreach. Kingdoms that grew too large too quickly often found themselves unable to cope with external threats or internal dissent. The impetus to expand and conquer proved both a driving force for cultural achievements and a source of eventual downfall when resources no longer sufficed. Yet the cultural memory of these early states remains powerful. The epic poetry of Mesopotamia, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, includes references to conflict and the heroic ideals of kings. Egyptian tomb inscriptions and temple carvings keep alive the names of warlike pharaohs who marched across the Sinai or launched naval expeditions down the Red Sea. Even the basic lexicon of phalanx, chariot, spear, and composite bow can be traced back to these pioneering centuries of warfare. Each new layer of archaeological discovery, whether an ancient weapon found in a desert tomb or cuneiform tablets describing a campaign, enriches our understanding of how war molded the earliest of advanced societies. And each find reminds us that, from the earliest beginnings of urban life, humanity has wrestled with the paradox of using organized violence to protect, enrich, and sometimes devastate entire populations. In conclusion, warfare in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia was not a mere backdrop to historical events. It was at the core of how these civilizations defined themselves. The forging of armies, the building of fortifications, the weaving of diplomacy, and the tributes to gods of war all reflect a collective mindset that believed survival and glory went hand in hand with martial prowess. Over 1,500 years, from approximately 3500 BC to the dawn of the Iron Age after 1200 BC, the Egyptians and Mesopotamians wrote a grand, if often tragic, story of conquests, defeats, alliances, and innovations, leaving indelible marks on world civilization. Their struggles and achievements echo across millennia, shaping how future empires, from Persia to Rome, would approach the eternal question of how to prepare for and engage in war.